We begin, though, with our big story and the fears that Israel's war in Gaza now could spiral across the Middle East. Earlier today, 2 explosions claimed the lives of at least 95 people during a ceremony honoring a prominent Iranian general killed by the U.S. in 2020 in a drone strike. And then also in Lebanon, a drone strike killing a top Hamas leader in southern Beirut on Tuesday. U.S. administration officials are telling ABC News that Israel was behind that attack and that they did not alert the U.S. before that operation. Israel has not publicly claimed responsibility. And in the meantime, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has said in a speech today that the group is not afraid of war. So joining us right now is our ABC News national security and defense analyst, Mick Mulroy. Mick, thank you so much for being here with us. And let's start here first with Hezbollah. They're far more sophisticated and even more well-funded than some of these other Iranian proxy groups. And you're hearing from the leader saying that this attack in Lebanon specifically, Mick, will not remain without response and punishment. So, Mick, how do you view their response now that U.S. officials are saying Israel is behind that?
So, Kana, this is significant because Hezbollah, I think, was already under pressure to do more. They are essentially, as you said, much more equipped a group, a proxy of Iran. In fact, Iran IRGC started Hezbollah, and they haven't done that much. And now that they've said publicly, they kind of put a red line out there. If you attack Hamas in Lebanon, we'll have to respond. And that, it appears, is exactly what it looks like Israel did in a very precise strike that took out the number 2 political leader in Hamas. So I think there is a situation right now where we are looking at a potential second front. There are countries right now warning their citizens to get out of Lebanon, to include Germany. And I think that there's a reason for it. Hopefully this doesn't happen. It's something that the United States has tried to deter from happening. One of the reasons why we had 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean, somewhat unprecedented, but it looks like this might happen, and we're going to find out in the next few days.
And so, of course, on the heels of that strike there in Lebanon, there was 2 explosions today in Iran, killing more than 90 people. What intelligence do you have right now about, first of all, who could have been at that ceremony that was honoring this prominent Iranian general that was killed in 2020? And also, Mick, who could be responsible for that?
Okay, this was the anniversary of the U.S. strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, who was not only the head of the IRG Quds Force, he was somewhat of a legend inside Iran. So it's likely that there was senior IRGC, potentially MOIS, which is the intelligence service of Iran there, and perhaps why they targeted this. I think it was clear from Admiral Kermey's statement today that the United States does not think it was Israel. And I think coming on the heels of saying they did think the one in Beirut was Israel, that should really count for something. I don't think that we think it is, and for it's likely not. And this is really not within their modus operandi of how they carry out operations. So to the point of your question, who would be the other groups? ISIS or other Sunni-affiliated terrorist organizations do operate in Iran. They have a lot of issues with the IRGC, just like many other countries and many other entities do. That's likely the group that did this, but there's also opposition groups in Iran that have a motive. It does show that they had a very lax security around this event, which, to your point, would have brought in a lot of dignitaries. But this is something that Iran's going to have to deal with, and they will have to decide whether they acknowledge that it was internal or ISIS, or whether they want to use it as some kind of political leverage against Israel. But it does not look like Israel did this attack.
And with the unrest growing and the violence growing in the Middle East, Mick, do you anticipate the U.S. policy changing at all in the region?
So I don't think the policy is changing for the United States, nor do I think we're pushing the strategy to change for Israel. We have, of course, pushed them hard to change their tactics and how they carry out their war in Gaza to reduce civilian casualties and human suffering. But overall, I don't think that we're going to change how we see the current situation. I think we will be talking, and Secretary Blinken's en route to the region to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his foreign policy counterparts, but he's going to really push to do everything, I think, that Israel can do not to open up this second front. There's been a lot of talk inside the Israeli security cabinet about doing that, something the United States doesn't want to see.
All right, Mick, Mulroy, we so appreciate your time. Thank you. Let's bring our big story to our panel right now. So joining us today is our ABC News contributor and Sirius XM radio host Mike Muse, and our ABC News contributor and former Republican congressman from New York, John Katko, and Democratic strategist and president of Next Gen America, Christina Sensun-Ramirez, and ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the LA Times, LZ Granderson. Thank you all for being here. Mike, let's start here with you. So when you see these attacks and the immediate finger pointing starts, right, Mike? It happens right away. And then it reinforced the unrest that you're seeing in the Middle East. How do you see these Iranian proxy groups potentially benefiting from that chaos?
I was thinking about that earlier today in the sense of sometimes there can be confusion that gets created in order to distract your enemies in order for your own personal benefit and personal gain. And I think that the Middle East is in such an unrest position right now. And so I think adding more chaos only helps adversaries in their aims and missions as they go after their own enemies too as well. I like the conversation that you and Mick just had just now, in particular question you asked him about does policy change for the United States? I think ultimately with Israel, I think they're going to have to come to some type of discussion on do they need to adjust their military objectives? Because yes, the United States has put pressure on Israel to reduce their tactics in order not to cause harm. But Kana, we're seeing a humanitarian crisis rise. We're seeing a conflict possibly about to broaden with Lebanon. And then Iran could possibly is now pointing fingers at Israel. That's a three-pronged potential war front that would create even more unrest and civilian casualties. So I think the military objectives may need to change.
And actually, I'd like to take that point to you, LZ, if I can. Today, NSC spokesperson John Kirby again reiterated today, LZ, that you cannot eradicate an ideology, but that it is possible for Israel to weaken a group like Hamas to the point where they're no longer a threat. But the question remains, LZ, do they need to modify their strategy here?
Well, they certainly need to communicate what victory looks like. And I think what you're seeing, particularly with progressives, is that we can no longer accept the idea that victory is defeating Hamas, because to your point, you're not defeating an ideology. You can't defeat a thought. So what exactly is this funding going to? What exactly is the United States supporting? And a lot of young people today are asking themselves, what policies are we actually putting our votes behind? So as this issue in terms of, Israel quite possibly expanding the war and having a second front is going to have a lot of domestic blowback as well that President Biden is going to have to navigate through. And Speaker Mike Johnson was very smart to start this year off at the border, because a lot of money is being spent and Americans are asking, what about us?
What about the southern border? How do we protect it? Right. And John, to you, U.S. officials are also telling ABC News, of course, Israel is behind what has been described as a surgical strike that killed this Hamas leader in Beirut and 5 others. But Israel itself has not publicly taken any credit there, John. Officials, though, also are really careful to note the U.S. was not alerted before that operation, and added that they don't actually have that kind of expectation to be notified. So, John, how much intelligence and how much play does the U.S. really have in these day-to-day Israeli operations?
Well, I think it's catch as catch can. I think they have a very good relationship with Israel, but it's not 100% information flow. And if you take a step back and look at this whole problem, Iran is really at the basis of it. Iran has funded Hamas. Iran has funded the Houthi rebels, who are firing over 100 rockets and military devices at our troops. And Iran really helped back Hamas's attack against Israel back in October. Because of that, when you unleash that kind of violence, you sometimes lose control. And I think you're seeing that Iran is losing control to some extent when you see so many people within Iran being killed today in that bombing attack. So it's creating these splinter groups, and they have different priorities. And even if they were with Iran at the beginning, maybe things are starting to get out of control. And that does not bode well for the U.S. The U.S. has showed remarkable restraint and very good diplomacy to try and keep this thing from exploding out of control. Whether they can do so going forward, we'll see. But right now, I mean, like I said, Iran helped light the match of this whole mess, and now they've got a real problem on their hands as well. So it's going to be a real problem going forward.
Yeah, you're right, John. And Christina, as we remind our viewers here, of course, that Hamas, by the way, still holding over 100 hostages. The situation in Gaza remains dire. The UN saying nearly 90% of the population has been displaced there. More than half of the people there are starving. So, Christina, when you look at these attacks now happening in Iran and Lebanon, the war clearly appears to be widening, at least at some level. What do you think happens to the people now in Gaza, including the hostages?
I think the point that LB brings up is really critical, is that this is not just a foreign policy issue, that this is a domestic policy issue for the Biden administration. There's an election upcoming, and you have the vast majority of Americans that want a ceasefire, and actually many Israeli family members that want a ceasefire. So they don't want an expansion of the war because they fear it's going to make it harder to bring their loved ones home. And so I think there's going to be increased pressure on the Biden administration to push to not expand the war and actually, again, move towards a ceasefire. You mentioned half of the Palestinian population in Gaza is starving, according to the UN. 23,000 people have been killed, the majority of who are women and children, and then those 100 Israeli hostages. The last thing people, the families that are on the front lines of this war, the Israeli hostages and the Palestinian people want, is a further expansion of this war.
All right, Mike, John, Christina, and LZ, our thanks to you, as always.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.